Well, hello, great to be with you. We're going to start a new chapter today. So we're going to move on to a new chapter. And in the first section of this chapter, we have a new topic. So we'd seen chapter 7 is a bit of a transition in our study. After Solomon wrestled with the idea of vanity and all the pursuits of his life, he's now saying, how do we live under the sun? And we saw a lot of personal reflections and ideas of wisdom in chapter 7. Now here in chapter 8 at the beginning, there's going to be multiple topics in 8. We're just going to deal with the first one because it's a pretty big one. And it was a relevant issue at the time this was written, thousands of years ago, as so many things in Ecclesiastes, just as relevant today. So I'm going to throw it out there as an opening. And it's going to be reflections on our leaders. Now, the author of this, Solomon, of course, himself was a leader. He was also the son of a leader. So he was the son of David. And his father had been a king. Now, he had been a king just like we have today. We've had multiple times in our history, including recently, the last few decades, where we've had leaders where a father has been a president and then a son has been a president. And so Solomon was part of the history here. And so he's going to invite us here to have some reflections on leadership and reflections on our leaders, which can be maybe, a topic that can have the potential to be somewhat divisive. But I think there's some good lessons here for us to think about. So you can begin to chew on that as we open up the passage. But we're going to ease into it. So before we get to that, in this introduction, in this very first verse, before we get into the idea of our leaders, it's more of a general statement. In fact, in my Bible, it's written kind of centered in italics, like it's a bit of poetry. But it's a statement to think about before we get into the next part. Who is like the wise? And who knows the interpretation of a thing? A man's wisdom makes his face shine, and the hardness of his face is changed. So to begin thinking about this, we have the value of wisdom. Ecclesiastes has a lot of things going on, but it is included, as a section of the Bible and the Book of Wisdom. There are other books in the Book of Wisdom, including Proverbs, which has similar type of statements. There are things in Job that make it a book of wisdom as well. And in fact, I wanted to share this passage from Job 28, verses 12 through 15, though you could really look at almost that entire chapter of Job 28. It says, "But where shall wisdom be found? And where is the place of understanding? Man does not know its worth." And I'm going to pause there. I do think wisdom is greatly undervalued. We put a lot of value on many material things that can be lost. But wisdom is something that can transform us. So it's not found in the land of the living. The deep says it's not in thee, and the sea says it is not with me. It can't be bought for gold. So a person can have a lot of wealth. They can't buy wisdom. And silver cannot be weighed as its price. And it lets us think about this valuable commodity which we should seek. We should desire to have it ourselves. As we're going to turn to our leaders, it's something we'd like to see in them. But think about people that you know who have expressed wisdom, or you think are wise. It almost shows in their face. I was thinking of the passage where Moses comes down from the mountain and he's been with God, and the people could hardly look at him. His face shined. There's a countenance there, and a countenance can even display the wisdom. And so at the beginning of this, we just take a second and pause. When we think about wisdom, it's difficult to achieve. If you have any semblance of wisdom in your life, you should be thankful for it. It is God-given. You can't buy it, And it's something to desire, and it's something to ask for. Now, to the heart of our passage today from this gentle introduction. Okay, you might have even had a visceral reaction as I put up some faces of leaders that we've had in relatively recent times. And I'm making no commentary on any party, nor am I making any commentary on any of these leaders. We have some Democrats, and we have some Republicans. And of course, I could have put other faces up. And people can have very, very different reactions to all these people. And I'll ask you the question, as I was reading that opening verse, is it applicable to the leaders that we have? And then, in some cases, whether it was today, whether it was last year, whether you're looking at some historical period, you may say, I don't think that leader is very wise. I don't think they are, or I don't think they have led our country very well. So how am I to respond to that? There was one commentary I read, and it was an older commentary, so it was not about any particular face up on the screen now. But it was, and for this part of the passage, how do we respond to foolish leaders was the name of the commentary. Again, not pointing to anybody, and we can look back at history even, apart from the leaders we have today. And of course here I just have presidents up, but there are other levels of leadership. There are governors, there are leaders in our lives. So generally, how do we respond to this? It's a topic from then, it's a topic for today, it's a topic as long as we live on this earth we'll have. So first, it's often hard. Isn't it hard when you have a leader and you don't agree with them? You maybe not only don't agree with them, you have a hard time respecting them. It's difficult. Yet, we're told in this passage, keep the king's command because of God's oath to him. Now, I think there's a lot of examples we could see. But I mentioned earlier that Solomon was the son of David, who was the king. But there was a time before he became king. In fact, if you remember our study, or some of you may remember a study way back, some years back, it's a study of 1 Samuel. And 1 Samuel gives us the story of the very first appointed king in Israel's history. And that was King Saul, and he was popular because of his height and his being handsome and looking the part so good. And at that time, David was but a shepherd boy. And there were times that King Saul acted very foolishly. And there was even worse, he tried to take David's life. Yet, David kept a loyalty to him. He would not touch God's anointed. He said, God's in control of all this. And there's passages, 2 Samuel, 2 King, 1 Chronicle, amongst others. Now, is that because that person, whether it be King Saul, whether it be anybody that we've had in the United States or whoever, because they're so great? No. But whether we like it or not, that person is in the office, and they are at that time the representative of the country. And there needs to be order and not disorder. So it's tough. It's tough. And it's absolutely not new. It has been difficult since the beginning of time. But it goes on and says, be not hasty to go from his presence. Do not take your stand in an evil cause, for he does whatever he pleases. For the word of the king is supreme, and who may say to him, what are you doing? Whoever keeps the command will know no evil thing, and the wise heart will know the proper time and the just way. Now, as we're taking a little time to reflect upon this, we're looking at our passage, we're applying it to our own lives. So I want you to think about just even in your own lifetime. not just this very moment in time, but how many presidents have we had? Again, that's just one example. I don't know how good we would do in a history lesson with governors or whatever. Can you name the presidents in your lifetime? I'm sure you had various views on all of them. Of course, we can't just limit ourselves to the United States, because there's leaders all over the world. There's leaders in Russia. There's leaders in China. There's leaders in Korea and Japan and wherever. Because, of course, the Bible is not just written for us here in the United States. And then think not only of our lifetimes, but a study of history. For example, as we were just referring earlier to David in the time of the kings in the Bible, but also other nations, whether it be Egypt and the Pharaohs or ancient Rome or whatever. So what does all this reveal and how do we respond? There's a lot to think about with that. I think the biggest thing it reveals to me is all human leadership, regardless of party and regardless of time. Some I may agree with more, some I may agree with less, but they are all very fallible. And they are all far from perfect. But regardless of how I feel in my life, how do I respond? Well, I'm going to take us now to a New Testament passage. And I think there's at least two parts going on in this reflection from 1 Timothy 2. And I think here's some safe ground, regardless of how we feel. First of all, then, I urge that supplications, prayers, intercessions, and thanksgivings be made for all people, for kings, for presidents, for leaders, and prime ministers, whoever they may be, and all who are in high positions, that we may lead a peaceful and quiet life, godly and dignified in every way. And this is good, and it is pleasing. Now, those leaders, whoever they may be, to whom much is given, much is required. They are by no means getting a free pass. Those who would desire a position like that have a great responsibility on their shoulders. And while we pray for them, and we want them to have wisdom, and it is good, even if you have a strong dislike for someone, you should pray for them, because they are in a position. But they will also be held accountable to a much higher power than us for the decisions that they make. So I urge you, even when it's hard, you pray for your leaders. And that's any time now, and it's any time in the future, regardless of who is in office. And by the way, it's other types of leaders too. It's not just a president. But here's the second part, and this ought to give us a lot of hope. Our ultimate king, our ultimate authority, our ultimate leader is wise and perfect. For there is one God, and there is one mediator between God and men, and it is the man, Christ Jesus, who gave himself as a ransom for all, which is the testimony given at the proper time. And that in this present world, whether it was the time of David, whether it's been any geography or scope of history, there have always been leaders, and those leaders have done good things and bad things. Some better, some worse, but they all fail. But we have a true king, a true leader, and I'm going to end with this today. And it's usually a passage we share around Christmas, but I think about applying it to this passage today. And it's our hope for the future, the perfect king. So in Isaiah 9:6, for to us a child is born, to us a son is given, and the government shall be upon his shoulder, and his name shall be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. Of the increase of his government and of peace there will be no end. On the throne of David and over his kingdom, to establish it and to uphold it with justice and with righteousness from this time forth and forevermore. The zeal of the Lord of hosts will do this. There's going to be a day with a new government and a new leader, and it's going to reign forever. And we'll serve under a true king. For now, we will have kings and leaders and presidents and whoever that will come and go. Regardless of our feelings, there has to be respect for the office, and there has to be prayers for them. That's important. But we also have this hope in our heart. Hope for the future. The day when we'll have the true perfect government and the true perfect leader reigning over us.